Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Our topic this first hour will be abuse and domestic violence, something we've talked about on this program before. That abuse can be open and flagrant and in your face, but sometimes that abuse can be subtle and devious, may explode on the scene or gradually creep into a relationship. And so we're going to be talking about some of the real concerns that we have in this country, considered to be, if not the leading, certainly one of the leading causes of injury to women, ages 15 to 45. And if you want to look overseas, even worse, globally, 1 in 3 women have been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused. And so we're going to spend some time talking about this today. We recognize that although women are the primary victims, certainly men may be victims as well. And this will help you understand a little bit more of all the different kinds of abuse: emotional, physical, sexual abuse, social abuse, financial, even spiritual abuse. We'll do our best to try to cover some of those points as we talk about this new book, Is It My Fault? Hope and Healing for Those Suffering Domestic Violence. It is co-authored by Justin Holcomb, who joins us now by phone. He's an Episcopal priest and teaches theology and philosophy and Christian thought at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and Reformed Theological Seminary. He's previously taught at the University of Virginia and Emory University, holds master's degrees from Reformed Theological Seminary and a PhD from Emory University. Justin, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about a subject that most people don't want to talk about, and I'm thankful that we get to hash this stuff out and let people know about this issue. Well,
and I certainly have said before that it's a underreported topic in the crime statistics, but it's an under-discussed topic in the churches. I would wonder if any of our listeners over the last year or two have heard a sermon that even alludes to, in passing, this issue of domestic violence. And I think I've given enough statistics here to remind people that it's an issue that deserves a lot more attention.
Well, there was just a recent survey done by Lifeway, and they asked pastors and said, how often do you talk about this issue? And many have never talked about it or mention it once a year and rarely actually discuss it or bring it up. And so it is an under-discussed in churches issue, let alone in our culture. And there's so much shame wrapped up in it. So it's one of those issues that unless victims aren't going to be raising the flag and saying, hey, let's talk about this for the most part, because there's so much shame involved. And then you have churches, which should be a place where they're leading the charge on making sure women are cared for well. It was kind of a key thing for the ministry of Jesus and God's people before Jesus arrived on the scene, but they're not doing it. And so this is under-discussed, it's not preached about, and those suffering from it aren't, they're not prone to bringing it up in casual conversation, if at all. It's one of the hardest things for them to do is actually discuss it with somebody else.
Talking with Justin Holcomb, he and Lindsay Holcomb have written the book, Is It My Fault? Hope and Healing for Those Suffering Domestic Violence. It is published by Moody Publishers. Should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but since a lot of bookstores may not have that book, or you may not have a local bookstore near you, we have posted it on our webpage, pointofview.net, in our Point of View store, so you could order it right there. We have an article about the book that is there. We have a link to Justin Holcomb's website, and then one of the articles I've written on abuse and domestic violence. All of that is available at our website, pointofview.net. Let me start by asking the question on the cover of the book. Is it my fault? That's a question that victims and survivors ask themselves all the time. Your response?
Absolutely not. There's nothing a person, a woman can do. And like you said earlier, I recognize men and women can both be the recipients of violence, but we focused on women because predominantly it is women. There's nothing a woman can do, say, believe, or anything that makes them deserving of abuse. And that's the main question. We answered 5 other questions in the book, in the heart of the book, but the first question, before we even got to those 5, is the main question. Is it my fault? Because they feel so much blame. Many women are thinking, well, it's probably because I'm a bad mother or wife or girlfriend, or I was a bad daughter, I'm a bad Christian. It's probably because of my abortion, or I had premarital sex, or there's something that they think they have done that this is God finally kind of disciplining them or getting back. And most people, and I understand this, I mean, many people have a default mode of karma. Well, I've done something bad, therefore something bad has to happen to me. And that's kind of the default mode of the human heart. That's why grace is so shocking, because it undoes karma. It's the opposite of karma. And so, no, it is not your fault. No matter what you did or said, no matter how bad you think it was, there's nothing you can do to make you deserving or worthy of abuse.
I might just mention, you used the word grace a little bit later in the book, especially in the second part there. You talk about grace as part of the ministry that God gives us. But let's also, we sort of dealt with the issue of the fact we're going to focus on women, though we know men are abused as well. But there's one other kind of disclaimer, and that is you use the word victim, but of course a number of people that have been victimized in the past call themselves survivors. But in order just to have clarity, you use the word victim all the way through the book.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing this up. I do want to be sensitive to it, and I get why some would say, you know what, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. And if you think about it, the word victim sounds like the perpetrator won, they're a victim. It sounds like they're passive, it sounds like they lost. Survivor sounds strong, it sounds like they have overcome this. And what we don't want to do, and we brought this up really clearly early in the book and said, hey, we're going to use the word victim just for consistency's sake, but we don't want to bestow to you an identity, you know. And the reason we wanted to say victim and not survivor is because so many people, they don't feel like survivors.
That's right.
When you start saying, hey, you're a survivor, they think, man, I've even failed in suffering from domestic violence. I'm not a survivor. I feel like a victim. I don't feel victorious. I feel beaten down, and I don't feel like I've survived anything. So what that does is it can bring shame to some people. So we wanted to avoid saying, here's another place where you can feel like you failed. And if someone wants to say, I'm a survivor, we hope people feel like survivors. We're hoping that the grace of God, that the compassion that they get from their Creator and the people of God would cause them to heal and have hope and feel like they have survived something that wanted to destroy them. But if they don't, they can get there, and we believe that's what God wants them to do. So that's why the title says those suffering domestic violence. It's not victims or survivors. It's kind of vague, but that was the reasoning behind it, was we wanted to be sensitive to the experience of those who are suffering this very destructive and painful experience.
Just again, we want to encourage you to listen to the program, and a little bit later we'll give you a chance to join the conversation today. We're going to be real sensitive, but again, if you have young children, since we are talking about difficult issues, I'll let you make that choice. The book is entitled, Is It My Fault? Hope and Healing for Those Suffering Domestic Violence, and it is published by Moody Publishers. It is a book that certainly I would recommend to you. Part 1, What is Domestic Violence? We're going to spend some time as we come back from the break talking about that. A little bit later, we'll get into the second one, Women, Domestic Violence, and the Bible. And then if we have some time, a whole reflection on some of the Psalms, Psalm 18, Psalm 22, and Psalm 55. Great resource, and I certainly would recommend all of you that are in a ministerial capacity to get a copy of this book. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The humanitarian crisis on our southern border is growing daily. Even before the President and Congress resolve the issue, they need to find places for these illegal minors who have crossed the border into our country. We're running out of room on military bases, and that is why what happened recently in Virginia illustrates the problem the government faces when they try to relocate thousands of kids from Mexico and Central America. Lawrenceville, Virginia is a community of about 1,500 residents. More than three-fourths are African American. They learn firsthand what happens when the federal government plans to relocate hundreds of illegal minors in their town. Federal officials decided to place 500 of these kids in a black college that was shut down last year. The citizens did not take kindly to the federal plan. A town hall meeting held last month brought an overflow crowd of more than 1,000 angry people to protest the government's plan to relocate illegal immigrant children. Citizens expressed concern about public safety. They wondered if the crime rate would skyrocket because these children, some of whom are up to the age of 17, would be placed on a campus without much adult supervision. Concern about disease also rated high on their complaints. Children from these countries are bringing in diseases like tuberculosis, dengue fever, hepatitis, malaria, chickenpox, and measles. This would place an added burden on medical facilities and increase the possibility that these and many other diseases would spread to the general population. You know, it's understandable why the federal government might have picked this town. The college was empty and the population was primarily African American. Most of the residents probably voted for President Obama. This community should have been one of those most supportive of the president's relocation policy. It wasn't, and that illustrates the problem the federal government faces as it moves thousands of illegal immigrant kids to other parts of the country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Justin Holcomb, co-author of the book, Is It My Fault? Hope and Healing for Those Suffering Domestic Violence. And if you'd like to join our conversation a little bit later, we will open up the phones. We've posted a number of articles, one about the book, one that I've written before on the issue of abuse and domestic violence. That will also link you to others on everything from spiritual abuse to verbal abuse and much more. And if those are resources you would like to have, we certainly do encourage you to visit the website today, pointofview.net. Also, you can get a copy of the book if you go to that website or look for it in your local bookstore. It is published by Moody Publishers. Justin, let's for just a few minutes, and it seems silly we have to do this, but it's very important, describe what abuse looks like. I've talked to individuals that over the years realized that they had been abused and it hadn't even occurred to them. And so you have a section on signs you're in an abusive relationship. You would think we wouldn't have to describe that, but some people become so used to being abused they don't even realize abuse is taking place.
Yeah, and especially if the definition that people have, the working definition, is so narrow that it only includes physical assault. I mean, there's numerous ways that my wife was a domestic violence shelter case manager. So she was the front line of women coming in from trying to get away and be in a shelter and just be in a safe place. And they would come in and say, I don't think I'm being abused or anything, but he is doing these types of things. And my wife would say, no, that's legally that's domestic violence. So there's intimidation, there's physical assault, sexual assault, battery, stalking, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, economic, psychological, spiritual, isolation, financial. There's so many ways that this can take place. And we gave a definition. It's just 2 sentences, and we're not trying to be clinical, but we wanted to be clear. Because what we found is exactly what you said. We have numerous times either given the definition and people have said, wow, that applies to me, or we've given the list of effects and said, hey, here are the effects of this type of abuse, and people have said, these effects fit for me. Maybe I guess I do fit in that definition. So it's been amazing to see how important a clear sentence or two is. So here's our definition. Now, domestic violence or domestic abuse, I'm fine with either title, is a pattern of coercive, controlling, and abusive behavior by one person in an intimate partner relationship. Now, we talk about that because what happens is many people who are dating or engaged or in other type of intimate relationships, they think, well, we're not married, so this abuse doesn't count. It's not as damaging or painful. And it is. So by saying intimate partner abuse, we're not trying to make a political statement about marriage or anything. We're just saying there are intimate relationships where you're dating or you're divorced or you're married or you're same-sex or whatever the thing is, where there's intimacy and someone is harming the other person, and they're trying to gain power and control over the other person in that relationship. And this is done through numerous behaviors. It can be anything that frightens, intimidates, terrorizes, exploits, manipulates, hurts, humiliates, blames, injures, or wounds an intimate partner. The best story or anecdote, anecdote's too flippant, is a woman who my wife and I had worked with, and she said, well, he never hit me, and I don't have any marks, but tell me what you think about this. He came home from dinner, he didn't, and this happens on a regular basis, once a week or two. He doesn't like the meal that I make, or it's cold, or it's not ready when he comes home. Any one of those things can set him off, and that's her language, is that she set him off. And if he doesn't like it, what he'll do is he'll put the food in the dog dish, stick it in the corner of the dining room, and make me eat dinner out of the dog dish while the children watch. And just the image of that story, and that's happened on a regular basis, and he would sit there and just, curse at her and berate her for what she did and tell her that she was a failure as a Christian, as a failure as a wife, failure as a mom. And she said, well, what is that? I said, that's a whole bunch of abuse. Yes. And what usually happens is the physical violence actually is usually the last thing to happen. Usually it escalates from verbal and emotional, spiritual, psychological threats, and it escalates. By the time it gets to physical, it's escalated quite a bit, and it will escalate more. So the ways that you can tell if you're in an abusive relationship are not by whether he slaps, punch, kicks, pulls your hair. That's when you're getting into the very dangerous land. Many women have said, you know what, not to minimize the physical, but the physical was almost easier to deal with because the physical pain would go away after time. The body heals. The verbal and psychological and emotional stuff, I can't get away from the haunt of what he did and said. And that woman said, you know what, eventually he ended up escalating to physical. And she actually said the most painful thing was being humiliated in front of my children by my husband, forced to eat dinner out of the dog bowl while they all sat at the table and he yelled at me. That hurts the most out of all of the stuff that she ended up suffering.
Wow. We're talking about the book again, Is It My Fault? And it is on domestic violence. And Justin, you sort of alluded to, so let's talk about this, what you might call the cycle of abuse, because oftentimes people get caught off guard because there is sort of this calm phase for a long period of time. Then there's a little bit of tension, a tension phase, and then the crisis phase, whatever that is. And it can be physical or emotional or verbal or whatever. But then you come back to the calm phase. And I've had some people say, I don't know which was worse, the verbal abuse or then the attempt to try to be my best friend and to pretend nothing happened the next day.
Yeah, just by request, it's a joy to talk to you because you've talked to these people. You know the texture of their story, so I'm really thankful for what you're bringing up. This is really helpful just for your audience and to be able to talk about this. That's exactly it. Is you have tension, and then it turns into crisis, and then there's calm or the honeymoon phase where there's apologies, there's cards, there's There's resolve, I'll never do that again, and that is so confusing. And that's what causes many people to stay in the painful, abusive situation, which is, well, they hope. They married this person or they're with this person because they like them and they love them and they felt loved by them. And so it's very confusing. If my wife suddenly just turned into a manipulative, controlling, verbally abusive, emotionally, psychologically abusive person, it would really confuse me. So I get the confusion. That makes sense to me. When and you have these emotions of I don't want to get hurt, but I do hope that this person will change. I do hope that this person will love me. And exactly what you said, sometimes the physical and the crisis phase is so confusing, but then while there's the tension before it goes back into crisis phase, during the calm, you're walking on eggshells. You start wondering, well, what do I need to do and not do and not say so this doesn't happen again? And here's the thing that we realized, and numerous studies have even said this too, there's nothing you can do or not do, say or not say, to stop the crisis phase from coming on, because they're actually very rational in what the abusers are doing. They're not in a fit of rage. When they hurt you physically, they hurt you usually where things are covered. They don't do it in front of other people. It's actually thought out. They know what they're doing, and they like it. It fulfills a desire that they have to exert control over you. And so what happens is they think, while they're in the calm phase and they can feel the tensions rising, they're thinking, oh, what did I do to bring this upon myself? You didn't do anything. He chose to abuse. You didn't do anything wrong or say anything wrong or forget to say something. That was just an excuse that he used to hurt you.
Wow. We need to take a break, but when we come back, I might even talk about for those who are listening who can be helpers. And I'm talking about pastors or counselors, Bible fellowship teachers, Sunday school teachers, friends. Sometimes the problem is as you say, they hit where you can't be seen. They only explode behind closed doors. And how many times, Justin, have we heard pastors unfortunately say to a woman or even a man, but we'll take the woman for a minute, coming in and saying, my husband is abusive, and they say, Bill Smith? No, not Bill Smith. Not your husband. Oh, he's a pillar of the community. He's a deacon, and I can't even imagine that. I think and you know all the problems there. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're also going to give you a chance to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. We wanted to try to put as many resources in your hands because we believe that this issue of abuse and domestic violence is very important. So first of all, you can be looking for this book. It is published by Moody Publishers, and it is a book of about 200 pages. It is available on our website, too, because we think very highly of it, so you can go to the Point of View store and order it there, or, of course, look for it in your bookstore if you have a bookstore nearby, and make sure that you have a copy. And if you are in a position of leadership, especially spiritual leadership, I really do encourage you to have this book on your shelf. As well, we also have a short article about the book so that you can have that material. We have my piece that was a week of radio programs I did really about a decade ago on abuse and domestic violence, and it looks at all different kinds of abuse, and we're focusing today on more of the domestic violence part of that, but there is much more abuse than simply that as well. And then we have a web link to justinholcomb.com in case you wanted to know more about some of the resources that he has available. So it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to join our conversation along the way, 1-800-351-1212.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this.
fight with all my life. Let your glory shine down. Let your glory shine down.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continuing our conversation today with Justin Holcomb, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Book is entitled, Is It My Fault? Hope and Healing for Those Suffering Domestic Violence. And Justin, just a minute ago, I was talking about the fact that sometimes the women that are abused, or even sometimes the men, they don't necessarily get the sense that people will believe them. And maybe that maybe is a good transition into a section that you have on why some abused women stay. I think fear is one aspect of that. Fear that there will be more abuse or abuse of my children, but also fear that people won't believe me. And I think those in the helping professions have perpetuated some of that. And then in just a minute, we're going to talk about some of the religious and cultural issues, because you have a whole section here on what the Bible has to say. Sometimes various teachings in churches or in mosques, synagogues, and other things also keep people stuck. But there are, I think, a number of people listening to this that say, well, you get abused, leave. Why are you staying? Explain that if you might.
Yeah, and that question, I get the question, because the average woman leaves and goes back to her abuser between 7 and 12 times. The average is, depending on the state and age, but it's between 7 and 12 times is the average and normal. And I get, when you see that, you're thinking, well, if it's so bad, then why do you stay? And that's a horrible question. Now, I get the question, because unless you understand the chains, it doesn't make sense. A more important question is, why does he choose to abuse, not heaping blame on the woman? But sure, it is a legitimate question. Why would a woman stay? Well, imagine if, there's numerous chains that are invisible, but fear, you mentioned, is the number one reason why most women do not leave an abusive or violent home. Finances is another enormous one, because of they're economically dependent, and then there's children involved, if there are children involved. Now imagine this: if you get married, your husband, who's probably controlling, says, "Hey, don't worry about school, don't worry about work, you stay home." No, my wife stays home with her children. She wants to stay home with the children. I didn't make her stay home with the children, and I married someone who would. But I wanted her to. I wanted my children to be parented. And that was a thing that we valued by us being as involved as possible. But imagine a man saying, no, don't work, don't worry about school, stay at home. And so there's marketable skills have not been developed, and so there's some financial components. And then where are they going to live? How's she going to pay for insurance? How's she going to get the kids to where they need to be? And then if you have some low self-esteem kicking in there with the mixed emotions we talked about earlier, and then you might have some religious community or beliefs and teachings where all you hear is, well, God hates divorce. Well, yes, he does hate divorce, and he also hates the abuse of women. But if all you hear is what did you do to make your husband so angry? And the Bible talks about submission, and if there's certain things that religious communities can tease out and emphasize, well, yeah, the Bible talks about mutual submission. The Bible tells me as a husband I'm supposed to lay down my life like Christ did for the church, and that my wife is supposed to submit. It says I'm supposed to die, be willing to die for her, and she's supposed to submit. Who's got the greater responsibility in that regard? That passage isn't meant to keep women down. That passage is to tell men, you have to lay down your desires in your life and things that are fulfilling for you for the flourishing of your wife and family. And if that looks like death, so be it, because that's what love looks like. That passage has been misused so many times, but you have all of those mixing together into a stew, and those are plenty of reasons why a woman would not leave.
Incredible. The first third of the book is worth it alone, but I wanted to spend some time in part 2 because it's a section on women, domestic violence in the Bible, and we sort of already have begun the conversation because we recognize that sometimes this domestic violence verbal abuse really comes from spiritual abuse. But you begin by talking about the positive, something you mentioned just a minute ago. Does the grace of God apply to me? There is a sense in which, even though you can be sitting in a church, it's a grace-oriented church, and believe that God's grace extends to you in terms of salvation, there is still a difficulty on the part, Justin, oftentimes, of many women that have been abused to really incorporate grace into their lives.
Well, absolutely. I mean, let me just tell you a quick story from yesterday at church for me. I'm a preacher. I'm a minister, and I've preached the good news for 20 years. I'm in church just listening. I wasn't working. I wasn't serving. I was just sitting with my wife, and the message was spectacular about the grace of God, and it bumped up to my default mode of karma. I didn't know it, but I started thinking, man, I don't think God's too happy with me based on my performance and my obedience and stuff like that, and God's probably... And it was kind of creeping in. Well, because of the proclamation of the grace of God, it exploded that, and I'm sitting there in the middle of the pew trying to wipe away tears thinking, thank God that He gives me grace and not reward based on performance alone. So if my default mode as a minister, as a Bible teacher, as a pastor is like that, I know that's the human heart. So imagine a woman, like we talked about earlier, she's thinking, what did I do to deserve this? And so does the grace of God apply to me? Because, I mean, even if I'm not at fault, I still have done other sins that make me feel dirty and disgusting. And even what happened, I feel shame, and I feel angry, and I feel despair. And so how, if the grace of God applies to me, how does it apply to this situation? I know it applies for salvation, but what about the day-to-day and how I actually feel about my identity and all of that? And that's the heartbeat of the book, is chapter 6, because we get to look at women who feel worthless and disgusting and beat down and saying, nope, you are a daughter of God. If you're in Christ, the words the Bible uses for you are pure, perfect, righteous. You're declared holy, without spot, blemish, or wrinkle. Basically, you are called what Jesus is and was. And that's yours. You're declared perfect, pure, and righteous. That's the Bible. That's not us making up some nice words to make them feel better. If you have faith in Christ, that's the good news for you. And that reaches through darkness and despair. That deals with our anger and our bitterness. That deals with our sense of shame. That good news actually has something to say to all of the emotional and spiritual effects of the harm and abuse that we have experienced.
Certainly. And there is sometimes a disconnect, as we all know, between our head and our heart, especially when we've done programs in the past on like sexual abuse. That word shame shows up quite a bit. I might in my head believe that God loves me, but I do feel defiled. I don't feel like I am the same woman or man before after sexual abuse. So certainly shame is something that has to move away from just the intellectual experience into my emotional adoption of that. So certainly some great material in the chapters. Let me, just before we take a break, though, at least to have you speak for a second on what does the Bible say about women, because part of the problem, I'm not saying it's as big a problem as maybe it was a century ago, but still part of the problem is in some of our churches, maybe more legalistic churches, women are not valued. Women are seen as second-class citizens, teaching about submission, teaching about silence in the midst of an oppressive husband, are all examples of spiritual abuse that allow and create a climate for domestic abuse.
Absolutely. You basically summarized the main point of what we wanted to say in the chapter, which is really helpful. But we want to be really clear, because we wanted women to say, what does the Bible say about me? Well, the Bible says you're an image of God. You're not a copy of a copy, that you are equal to man, different, obviously, but equal. The Bible actually celebrates plenty of women who were strong, who were good leaders, who were godly. Deborah, Miriam, the Abigail, Queen Esther, the woman of Proverbs 31. The Bible also has in the lineage of Jesus women who didn't have the best reputation either, who Rahab. And so you have both the Bible being really honest about the equality of women, that Jesus made a beeline and made sure that women were included in his followers, that they were part of his supporters, that they were the supporters of the early church. And so if you look at what the Bible says about women, it's actually extremely shocking, especially for the context of the original audience. The original audience would have heard what the Bible said and said, wow, this is really progressive stuff. You actually believe that they're fully equal, and you want to allow them to actually be supporters of the rabbi, and you're going to let them actually give money for the church and actually be involved. And wow, that's amazing. So we wanted them to feel and know that the Bible isn't making excuses for violence. The Bible doesn't look at it and go, well, I mean, you are inferior. I mean, what do you expect? So we wanted them to see wide open what the Bible has to say about who they are as images of God, as creatures of God, equal in every regard, as equal footing before God with men, and because many people come to the Bible with the assumption that the Bible teaches that they're inferior in some way. So we wanted to kind of explode that myth.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back, take some phone calls. Justin Holcomb with us as we talk about the book, Is It My Fault? We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Justin Holcomb with us. Let's go to California first, KYCC, Maryland. I'd love to hear your story.
Thank you for taking my call. I just heard a little bit a program. I was driving, and I pulled over, and just wanted to say I did meet a man in church, and we got married after almost 2 years of courting, and he was an usher in church and cell group leader, can quote scripture, just like so naturally. So, and when we married, we actually were married on a Friday, and the following Monday he began to abuse me, and became a man that I did not know at all. It was very, I was very scared, and he was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of deal, and he was just so full of the devil. And I would say that the whole time during the recording, I couldn't see anything, that I could pinpoint. There was a couple of times I wanted to break up with them, but I didn't really have I couldn't really find anything. I just knew my spirit was disturbed, and I wasn't mature enough in the spirit to understand that was the Holy Spirit trying to communicate with me. There's something wrong here.
Sure.
And so I almost lost my life. I almost lost my baby's life.
Wow.
And I escaped when my daughter was 3 weeks old, and he was asleep. That was nothing but the grace of God that kept him asleep, that we literally, I got into the car, it was on a slope, put it in gear and, took off. And for the next few years he harassed me. It was such a scary, scary thing. And I will tell you, the church did not stand by me. That if I had a lot of people turn their backs on me because it was one way in church and another way behind closed doors. He kept us isolated. And I will tell you, the church is not equipped to deal with these things. So if you're bringing it out to the forefront, that's good. The church, I found out, just researching his behavior, that he had mental illness issues. And, he had some trauma happen to him when he was a kid. He didn't want to talk about it too much, but researching his behavior, I understand that when children are traumatized as, when they're little, and if it's never dealt with, when they become adults, they can take on personality disorders and mental illnesses. And he was so evil. Like I said, he abused me while I was having my baby in the hospital. He tried to get me when he found out I was pregnant, he was mad. He tried to get me to have a miscarriage. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible thing, and I couldn't get people to believe me. I had even friends not even believe me.
Sure.
And so
let me give Justin a chance to jump in there, because she's given us all the pieces that we were talking about here. Individuals not seeing that behind closed doors very different than where he is in public. The fact that the church did not believe her, and maybe having some slight warning signs in dating, but a tendency sometimes, Justin, for women to think, well, we can fix it when we get married. And I think she gave us a story that is just an illustration, almost a textbook illustration of what you and Lindsay have been trying to write about in the book.
That sure is. I mean, first, her bravery and courage is amazing. I mean, leaving with a 3-week-old. I mean, that just got my attention. It was just amazing to hear that part. But the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde is another one that you hear a lot of in the church,
yes,
in particular, which is, man, this person's the usher, he's the deacon, he's the preacher, he's the Sunday school teacher, and then behind closed doors, and after marriage, something switches. It's almost like they have some sense of entitlement and ownership. Like, well, you're in now, and it's almost like in their mind, they're like, well, you made the commitment, and you're hooked, and you can't get away. But I've heard that quite a bit from younger women, older women. I mean, different ages, different stages of life, different, racial, everything. I've heard that story. The warning signs is that's Holy Spirit, like she said, I believe, and in some intuition. Like, looking back, now it all makes sense. Like, that was a small hint of what his controlling, manipulative behavior is like. But the main thing is, she said the church doesn't seem too terribly equipped. That is true. Many churches are not. That's why we wrote the book to victims, to survivors, so those who support them can overhear it and learn some more. And you brought up earlier, one of the most important things someone can do is actually believe a woman who tells the story.
Right.
Domestic violence and sexual assault are two of the least falsely reported crimes there are. It's like number 1 and 2. It's like, no one lies about this. You can't get people to tell the truth about what happened to them, let alone most people don't make up stuff. my wife knows of, out of the over decade of work that she's done, she knows of one case of sexual abuse that was false. And the rest were, the stories usually unfold and there's more and more dimensions. So one is believe them and say, I'm sorry, I believe you. Or bring it up in your Bible study or in your pulpit or in your friendships. Bring up, and when you're talking about the grace of God and hope and healing, put it in the list. Yes, the grace of God is for addiction. It's also for the sins we've committed. It's also for the sexual abuse. It's also for domestic violence. Just mentioning it as something that God cares about does amazing things. And then also communicating clearly that, quote, I am concerned for your safety. Like that line
Yes.
I believe you, and I am sorry this is happening, and I am worried about your safety. Because what that does is many people who are being abused, they've gotten used to it, and they found categories and ways to manage around the pain, and they still feel it. I'm not saying that they're managing it really well in the sense of it's no big deal, but when you say, I'm really concerned for your safety, it makes that reality of the intensity and the urgency front and center, and then invite to help. If there's anything I can do now or later, let me know. It could be months from now. Whenever you need help, let me know. So believe them, bring it up as you can in applying the good news of the message of Jesus and his scriptures. And so believe them, bring it up, tell them that you're concerned for their safety, and an open invitation. Give them an open invitation. And if the church could get trained better or work with domestic violence shelters. The church doesn't need to own it in the sense of doing everything. There's 2,000 shelters in the United States. If churches would say, hey, you know what, we're not sure what we're doing, and we think sometimes we're part of the problem, and we think that God despises domestic violence, what can we do to serve what you're doing? You're doing very common good. You're doing the work of grace by serving people who are hurt. We would like to come alongside and see if we can help in any way. And it would blow their minds, first of all, for churches to do that. But that way the church doesn't have to feel like they have to do everything. It's a daunting task to care for one woman if you have to figure out housing and safety and restraining orders and all of those different things that you have to do. You need help. And so that's where churches and networks could get together and actually work with these other organizations who are already doing it. You don't have to buy into 100% of their philosophy of life and worldview, but it sure is a good witness to the city and to that shelter of saying, hey, you know what? We don't want to be part of the problem. We actually want to help out, and we think that God cares about this. We're not going to require that you believe everything we believe, but we do want to help because we think that we overlap where you're doing this good. We think that that's also something the church should be involved with. That's a great way to care for abused women. That's a great statement of being a light, but that's also a really good way just to care about what God cares about and serve where he is about doing his work, which is giving hope and healing to those who are in despair.
Well, just great practical advice that comes from the book. Is It My Fault? I might even mention you have appendices on getting help, the various hotlines, making a safety plan, the church and women at risk. So again, this is certainly a book that is intended for those of you that have been affected in one way or another by domestic violence. It's certainly a handbook that needs to be in the hands and in the library of anyone that's in a ministerial function inside a church or outside it. So Justin, it's been a great program to have with you today. So thank you for joining us here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and we'll get into some other issues in the second hour. But again, if you'd like to know more about this particular book, we have it on our website, pointofview.net, in our Point of View store. We have an article about it. We have a link to Justin Holcomb and even one of my articles on abuse and domestic violence. Take the time to learn about this issue. You can be a matter and a very important mechanism and conduit for help and healing for others. So take these resources, use them effectively, and you can find them on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
I can't stop thinking about you. Jesus, I love you. How I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, in the second hour, I wanted to spend some time talking about how important it is for young people to get involved in the political process. We have so much at stake, and we've had these conversations before with my in-studio guest, but I think he brings a new level of experience, having run for state representative in the 108th District. But he's been with us on a number of occasions, and we've talked about the need to motivate the younger generation to recognize how important it is for them to exercise their stewardship responsibility by learning about the issues and being involved in campaigns, going out and voting, maybe even running for office. So we bring back to the microphone Court Alley, individual who is the founder and president of Caruth Marketing, which is a creative and marketing company. He has his bachelor's degree in government from the University of Texas, a graduate of Highland Park High School. And last time we talked with him, he was, of course, the executive director of Brighter Dallas, a conservative political action committee. Had to step down, although he's still on the board, because he ran as a state representative for the 108th District. Didn't turn out so well, but it was a great opportunity. And I think I wanted to get your reaction, first of all, for running for office. You know, up until now, Court, we've been talking about you being on the outside of the political process. For a while, you were running a campaign. And by the way, running a very good campaign. The fact that you lost, I wouldn't worry about that at all. I remember a few times when people like Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, and others lost. My father can tell you when he ran for the California Assembly, he lost quite a few times before he got successful. So there is no shame in losing, but it is exciting to have you in studio with us today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Kerby, and thank you to everyone for allowing me to come back in and talk to you about it. And, you know, it was a great experience running for office. It is something that my wife and I did together. It's anyone that's run for office that is married knows that that's something that you do together. And it was very taxing. We have a 2-year-old son.
Yes.
That is wonderful, but is 2 years old and requires a lot of work. I am the president of my own company, and it's a small company, so it does require some oversight. But it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. And it was fun because I think, first of all, the people I met were just unbelievable. Just the business leaders in the community, the support we had, some of the people that maybe didn't end up supporting us or didn't end up getting in the race, but were still just great people. And I loved getting a chance to meet them. But it was also fun to talk about things that matter to people. I think I think one of the problems we get into as Republicans a little bit too often is we're very critical of President Obama, but we forget we have these great conservative ideas that really change and affect people's life. And that's where I wanted to try to run my campaign, was based on ideas, based on what we can do as Texas that can really help people, not only in the 108, not only my neighborhood, but around the state.
You know, you mentioned your wife for just a minute. We got to give Mary Claire some props, because I have seen very successful campaigns. Recently, we had Ken Paxton here, his wife sitting next to him, and I even said at the time that it reminded me, having grown up in California, seeing Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, and seeing very successful campaigns, people underestimate how powerful and what an incredible asset a committed wife can be in a campaign, or husband, for that matter.
It is incredibly appreciated if you're looking at the outside in. My wife, whenever anyone would come up to me at a political event, they'd always say, "Hey, I just met your wife," and I'd say, "Well, listen, get ready, because it's all downhill from here." She's amazing. She's a clinical psychologist and is a great mom, and it was an encourager, and was just the best. I would not have had the success I had at all without having Mary Claire right there with me, and being an encourager, and being just great on the campaign trail, and just a great wife.
I, matter of fact, moderated one of the presentations that you and the two other candidates did, and she got brought up because you got talking about prisons, and she had worked in that system, and so it was just a great opportunity once again to use some of the experiences. You don't have to have all the experiences as a candidate. If your spouse has some of those experiences, you get a twofer that way.
Absolutely, and it was so. I think one of the things that I discussed there was her working. She was a clinical psychologist in this prison, actually the only maximum security prison in North America. So I was always a little fearful of her doing that, but that's where she worked there for a little while, and got a great insight into how the government works, and also would have been very interested in your previous segment, which I appreciate you doing, because that's something that it does not get enough attention, and she's brought that up a lot. And but it was great to be able to rely on her and be able to say, this is not only the experience I've had as a small business person, but this is the experience my wife brings to the table too. Because as Morgan, the gentleman that won the primary, knows, it's very important to have a great wife, and he has a great wife, and he's a great guy, and that's very, very critical.
Well, let's get into some of the issues, because you said we do have those issues, and the one front and center, which we're going to spend a lot of time tomorrow talking about with Representative Louis Gohmert, who's been to the border, immigration, and the rest. As a state representative, you recognize there wasn't too much that the state can do, but at the same time, we are seeing a humanitarian crisis, and all of a sudden we're seeing children literally walking across the border and giving themselves up. I think that pretty much puts a lie to the idea that the border is secure, when children can walk across the border, give themselves up, and now we have, the estimates are we're going to have as many as 60,000 of these illegal immigrant children beginning to be sent all over the United States in order to try to address this humanitarian crisis at our border.
It is a humanitarian crisis. It's not really a political issue first and foremost. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's one of the most interesting things I learned while running for office was we would debate issues all the time. We debate laws, we debate taxes, and we debate Second Amendment laws or bills that have been brought up that did or didn't pass. The border is one of the few issues that people don't seem to want to debate. No one denies what the law is. We just don't know whether or not we want to enforce it.
Yes.
And in my experience, when I talk to young people, I have never talked to a young person so far that they might not agree with our current law and how we bring people into this country, or maybe we need to broaden certain types of visas, or maybe we need to allow more people to come in, or just run it more effectively. But this idea that we should just simply not enforce the law is laughable. Yeah. It is unbecoming of a country such as ours. We should enforce the law. Now, whatever the law is, we can have a debate on that. But people are coming in here illegally. It is not a loving way to bring people into this country, and it has catastrophic liabilities with our healthcare system, with our educational system. And I've talked to a lot of people in those capacities, in those jobs, and they've said this is something that they struggle with. Now, if we bring people in here legally and we do it in the correct way, well, they're going to flourish, and we're going to have a great country built on immigrants. But if we don't do it legally, if we don't do it right, you're going to have what we have now. And we have to, and as a state representative, you're right, we can't, it is the federal government's job to secure the border. But there are things that we talked about, and you've probably talked about a lot, the magnets that tell people, hey, this is a good, come here illegally. Mm-hmm. Because even if you come here illegally, we're still going to accommodate you. That's where we need to be specific, and we need to make sure that we're being careful about not saying to people, come here illegally, because even if you do come here illegally, you're going to get a bunch of opportunity that otherwise people that are waiting in line coming here legally wouldn't get.
Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I wanted to get your comments, as I have talked with other candidates throughout this season who are Christians, and talk about how their Christian convictions address many of these issues. I mentioned Ken Paxton has been in the studio. We've had Scott Turner, and we've had Jeff Leach, and we've had Matt Krause, and we've had certainly a variety of individuals running for different offices, but always trying to make a connection, if you will, between their biblical convictions and some of those issues. So we're going to look at some of those issues of life and marriage and family and taxation, a couple of others, and we'll continue our conversation with Court Alley, but also along the way want to use some of the things that he's done over the years to encourage those of you that are young people. Maybe it's time for you to get involved. It's the future of your country, and you can determine that future. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The humanitarian crisis on our southern border is growing daily. Even before the President and Congress resolve the issue, they need to find places for these illegal miners who have crossed the border into our country. We're running out of room on military bases, and that is why what happened recently in Virginia illustrates the problem the government faces when they try to relocate thousands of kids from Mexico and Central America. Lawrenceville, Virginia, is a community of about 1,500 residents. More than 3/4 are African American. They learn firsthand what happens when the federal government plans to relocate hundreds of illegal minors in their town. Federal officials decided to place 500 of these kids in a black college that was shut down last year. The citizens did not take kindly to the federal plan. A town hall meeting held last month brought an overflow crowd of more than 1,000 angry people to protest the government's plan to relocate illegal immigrant children. Citizens expressed concern about public safety. They wondered if the crime rate would skyrocket because these children, some of whom are up to the age of 17, would be placed on a campus without much adult supervision. Concern about disease also rated high on their complaints. Children from these countries are bringing in diseases like tuberculosis, dengue fever, hepatitis, malaria, chickenpox, and measles. This would place an added burden on medical facilities and increase the possibility that these and many other diseases would spread to the general population. You know, it's understandable why the federal government might have picked this town. The college was empty and the population was primarily African American. Most of the residents probably voted for President Obama. This community should have been one of those most supportive of the president's relocation policy. It wasn't, and that illustrates the problem the federal government faces as it moves thousands of illegal immigrant kids to other parts of the country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in the studio with us today Court Alley, and he has been on the Brighter Dallas particular board and was the executive director at one time, a conservative political action committee, and also, of course, is president and founder of Caruth Marketing, and ran for state office. And I would encourage you to think about what you would do to change the government and to change the political process during this election year. We always want to encourage you to get involved, and if you'd like to join us along the way, maybe you have some thoughts about what you can do to get involved at the precinct level, maybe campaigns you're involved with. with, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But you mentioned some of those important issues. One of those that we've talked about on this program many times is the issue of abortion. And a lot of people say, well, there's really not much we can do. As long as we have the Supreme Court we have, there's nothing we can do. And I thought, well, look at the state of Texas, because the most recent legislative action have been able to, with certain kinds of regulations, close down lots of abortion clinics. And it does seem to me that our state legislators in every state could learn from this sort of model bill that passed the Texas legislature. Your thoughts?
Well, it was a great success for pro-life people all over the country. I think you have to look at it that way, because we did pass a bill that was very pro-life, and there was a lot of angst, if you recall, when we were trying to pass it. I talked to a lot of state representatives that said that it was pretty ugly down there for a while. And I think that's unfortunately how good legislation gets passed. Sometimes people get pretty upset about everything and get pretty aggressive. But we passed a law that is pro-life, and we're a pro-life state, and I'm proudly pro-life, and I think that was something that surprised me when I ran for office. I talked to a lot of people that were maybe they were pro-choice, but when I'd have a conversation with them and say, here's why I'm pro-life, here's what it means to me, here's why this is so valuable to me, I found that the opposition wasn't quite as staunch as I expected it to be. People were willing to listen if we could approach them in kind of in a bold and loving way and say, this is a powerful issue. This is an issue that my wife and I have dealt with by not only having a child, but having miscarriages.
Yes.
It's a very real issue, and it's not something that, to me, it's another one of these issues that transcends politics, and it's an issue of conscience and morality in my faith.
You know, you talked about that conflict. You know, we've had, as I mentioned before, we've had people like David Simpson and Matt Krause and Scott Turner and Jeff Leach. And, of course, I mentioned Ken Paxton a minute ago. And what we saw the last legislative session, led in part by Wendy Davis, and she had every right to have a filibuster, but it sort of got out of hand really quickly. And it reminded me of the conversation I had with Scott Walker a while back, because when you want to see what it looks like when it gets out of hand, go to Madison, Wisconsin. But we also saw one of those in Austin, Texas, too, where even before that, where if they didn't get what they thought was their vote, they would leave the state. At one point, you had state representatives go to Oklahoma. You had state senators go to New Mexico. And you did the same thing in Wisconsin. I'm a little bit concerned, Court, about what is going to happen in this republic if all of a sudden we see two things. Number one, these kinds of protests in state capitals. And number two, if individuals feel that they aren't going to have the vote go their way, instead of staying and fighting, just simply leave the state. I think those are very detrimental to the future of this republic.
They are. Two things give me encouragement about this, though. First and foremost, if you right now look at soon-to-be Governor Abbott polling against Wendy Davis, he's well ahead of her. I think that she's lost some support since there was an initial bump where she had a lot of celebrity, but I think she's gone down in support because I think people are coming around to really see the issue more clearly. And that encourages me, because I think that like I said, soon-to-be Governor Abbott, as I like to call him, is doing very well there and making his case effectively. The other thing that encourages me is if you look at a place like Wisconsin, so everyone came out in droves against Scott Walker, and everyone thought it was the end of the world because of how he wanted to restructure collective bargaining. Governor Walker's more popular than he's ever been right now. Right. And he's more popular because he took a stand, and people realized it wasn't the most popular stand. Look at what's happened in North Carolina with Governor McCrory, how he went up and how he changed the extended welfare benefits, and it's put the state into the black. And that's a very positive thing. But again, people were out there protesting. They were very worried about it. But I think when we take these stands and we say, listen, we want to be incredibly clear and listen to the other side and not be afraid to have a conversation. I feel very confident in my political positions, and I think that that's where people like you mentioned Representative Krause. He does a terrific job of sitting down and really hearing people out and then making this wonderful conservative case in a way where people don't say, he's not trying to win an argument. He's really trying to do something he feels like is best for the state of Texas. And I think that's what encourages me, because I've seen Governor Walker win that battle. Mm-hmm. And even to a degree where Governor Christie had to have some very just direct conversations with some of the union people early on.
I was thinking of Chris Christie in that regard, and Bobby Jindal a little bit comes to mind. And you go through a long list of individuals that seem that way, or even people on the national level. Ben Carson certainly strikes me. Dr. Ben Carson has been talking about the need for civility. We've talked about civility in this program for decades, but I think we need it more than ever before. And you have this kind of mindset that isn't held by everybody, but there are some on both the left and the right that say, look, I want to sit down and talk. But there are some on the extremes that say, no, you don't even have a right to a place at the table. And I think that's where we have to ask that both liberals, conservatives, and moderates say, we will have an ongoing discussion, and if you win, you win, and if you lose, you come back and fight another day. But this idea that political correctness says that certain ideas cannot even be openly discussed is certainly not what is going to be healthy for the future of this republic.
You're right. It would be very detrimental if we got afraid to discuss these ideas, and I think that's where my faith comes in primarily. Is we need to always be. I was reading somewhere about I think it was a Catholic priest that described how our faith needs to be bold and loving. It doesn't mean we back down from what we believe, but it means we sit and we're reminded constantly of how we're supposed to, frankly, honor our enemies and love our enemies. And if that's in the political battle, so be it. But that's when we have those discussions. I've found that I've been very fortunate that we didn't have a whole lot of very upset people come at us during the campaign. We had a few people that were a little frustrated, usually about our position on the Second Amendment. But most of all, people were willing to listen. They were willing to sit down and hear us out. And like I said, even when we didn't necessarily agree on everything, we walked away friends.
I must admit, and I'll give you credit and your two opponents credit, and I've gotten to know both of them a little bit better, that the debate that I moderated really was not a debate. It was a very civil discussion. And I thought, boy, I wish we had filmed it and shown other people what can happen when three individuals who have slight disagreements, although they agreed on most of the majors, could get together and have a civil discourse. And the way in which you complimented one another, and when you disagreed, you did it in a very respectfully kind of a way, and any kind of respect and graciousness that you could show to one another was the kind of model I hope we'll see in the future in the political process. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hoping that might happen.
Well, and the good news is we have now future State Representative Morgan Meyer out there carrying the flag for us, and he is a very cordial, kind, thoughtful, wonderful guy. And it was kind of a curse to run against two people you like. So,
why don't you put on your headphones here? We've got all sorts of phone calls, so let's work our way through a few of these phone calls here, and we'll start out in the state of Texas, KABX. And Helen, thank you for calling today.
Sure, for taking my call. My main concern is that unless the Republican Conservative Party puts back money to make sure there's not cheating going on in the elections, because it's been proven in the past, busting in people from other states, dead people voting, getting at the machine and pushing your button for one person and another name comes up. I mean, things like that. We need to make sure we have money allotted to make sure that there's plenty of people to stop this cheating, because we'll never win it because they cheat. And it's been proven in the past, the other side, they do cheat and they win elections. And just like Wendy Davis getting up there and using a device so that she wouldn't have to excuse herself from when she was filibustering, that should have been that wasn't right either. So we need to stop the cheating, and we need to take money and make sure that these elections are true and honest. But with the other side, I'm afraid that's not the fact.
Well, we're going to have to get John Funn back on the program here, because he wrote the book Stealing Elections and updated it. And of course, Catherine Engelbrecht was one of those individuals that, as we have found, court that when they went around, and this was in Harris County, and began to look at voter registrations, they would go to the address and it was an empty lot, or they go to another address and it was a Burger King, or there were all sorts of people that hadn't been alive for a long time that voted in the last election. So we need to pay attention to some of that, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Any sort of voter fraud shouldn't be tolerated. We need to be vigilant. There's this myth that the left has kind of perpetrated that it doesn't exist. That's not true. It does exist. You brought up one example, one of probably many. I haven't read Funn's book on it, but that would be the first step. I think The second thing that I'd like to see more Republicans do is I have not resigned myself to the fact that our message only works for some people.
I'm with you on that. And since we're coming to a break, I want to come back to that because that's one of the things Jack Kemp used to talk about. And certainly now we see Ben Carson and others. And certainly Rand Paul has been talking about that. You don't target your message. If the message is good, it should apply to all people. So let's take a break because I want to get into that in a little more detail. We've got a couple more phone calls. So let's take a break. And if you have a comment or a question, Court Alley with us today, 1-800-351-1212. We've posted a picture of our in-studio guest. You can watch on Facebook. And we will be back right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this.
Let your glory shine down. Let your glory shine down.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the political process. Some of the lessons that Court Alley learned as he ran for a state representative office, but also an individual that's been involved in really trying to get the next generation, the younger generation, the emerging generation, whatever phrase you want to use, to get involved in the political process. Because, Court, as you well know, sometimes the younger you are, the less likely you are to be registered to vote. The younger you are, the less likely you are to vote or be involved politically. And yet the future of America is dependent upon your generation to take the baton that we pass to you and carry it through the finish line.
And that's one of the things that interests me so much. And that's one of the things that really brought me into politics. When I started Brighter Dallas, my goal was to start a community or a group that would really reach out to people that didn't feel like political parties were reaching them, that didn't see a need to be involved.
Right.
And just to really focus on Dallas and say, what are we doing in Dallas? Who's our mayor? Who's our state rep? Who's our state senator? What does a sheriff or a county judge or what do these representatives do for us? And it was a great experience. And like I said, I'm still on the board, and it continues to be a great, growing, thriving group. But I think one of the things we need to be a little more direct about is, especially with younger people. I have 3 younger brothers and sisters, and who all fortunately are pretty conservative, but it's hard for them sometimes to get excited when they see the message being primarily what Obama's doing wrong.
Yeah.
He's been making a mess of this thing for a long time. We know it, but we have these great ideas, whether it's about, that recently the most activity I saw in Dallas among young people politically was when there was an effort to try to shut down Uber, which is kind of a premium car service. Young people came out of the woodwork saying, save Uber, hashtag save Uber.
Yeah.
We don't want this at all. And it really changed the entire discussion about it. But if, as conservatives, we walk out and we say, we want Texas to be a place that flourishes because we invite and encourage business. We don't want to shut it down. We don't want to play corporate cronyism and support one group over another. We want business to come here and work. That's how we're going to communicate with younger people, especially with all the emerging technologies.
Yes, certainly. Just before I take some more phone calls, what about this idea of a targeted message? I have one targeted message for the affluent, another targeted message for the Hispanic, another targeted message for the poor, another targeted message for African Americans. You and I both reject that idea, and you mentioned it before we went to the break. I'd love to hear your comments.
Before I was running for office, when I was talking to a gentleman that was helping with Brighter Dallas, he was a minister in South Dallas, and he said, the reason that I feel like so many of my neighbors are voting Democrat isn't necessarily because they believe in the Democrats as much as they just don't feel like Republicans are even making a shot at getting them.
Not even trying.
We should just be, that there's no excuse for that. And Governor Huckabee did a great job of that when he was running. He was always someone that was very proud and very ready to step into situations and environments that aren't going to be the friendliest. But he always was able to articulate his vision well, to be loving, to be kind, and to hear people out. And that we have to do that. Because our message is too good not to. It's a travesty if we don't sit and say, it's not for a bunch of rich people over here or this community or this neighborhood. It is for everyone. And it's worked in Texas, and it's continuing to.
Well, we'll talk more about that in just a minute, but let's take some more phone calls. I'll stay in the state of Texas for a minute. We'll go to John. John, what would you like to share with us today?
Well, I'm more of a moderate Republican. But, I'll tell you, I kind of switched to profession, and I'm around a lot of people that are also union members.
Uh-huh.
And they don't mind the Republicans, but they just always feel like the Democrats are looking out for them better. But what concerns me is, I've had 2 different Republican friends, and I said, hey, listen, my uncle's also been friends with Thad Cochran, and he's a moderate, but, he didn't re-win an election, and they just act like from the Tea Party that they're horrified with him.
Yeah, I think Thad Cochran did win re-election, right? So.
Yeah, but the problem is
primary.
They act like he used race baiting.
Oh, I
now,
see.
Is it wrong for a more moderate Republican is getting challenged by a very conservative. And a lot of these conservatives, I'm not going to say they're not proven, but they're kind of, I don't know.
Sure.
But anyway, so we use what might be termed race baiting. But I'll tell you, I looked at some of that thing. Is it wrong for Republicans to support Martin Luther King Day?
Oh.
Is it wrong for sometimes to have federal funds for public schools? I mean, some of that stuff, they act like they just want to cut all money off to anybody.
We've got a lot of wind there, but I think I got most of it there. And I think it comes back to the point you were making a minute ago, Court, and that is there are some perceptions, especially that have been created, like in the Republican Party, that, you know, he mentioned race baiting, he mentioned Martin Luther King Day, although I really have not seen that as a big issue lately. So, but okay, let's concede the point. There are some places where there is an image problem, and it's been created in large part by both parties, and that's why I think your generation is going, I don't really like the Democrats, not really sure I like the Republicans, maybe I just won't vote at all. And I think that's the travesty. And then when they see these really negative campaigns, fortunately you weren't in the midst of one, but I've had a few people in the studio where it's like, should I even bring them into the studio after all the negative things that have been said about these people and their character? This is really turning off your generation, and that's my real concern.
It should be a concern. There is he did bring up some legitimate points there. We don't need to taper down our conservatism, I don't think. I don't change my policy or my beliefs on taxes based on who I'm talking to or to try to win over supporters. What we have to do, though, what we have to realize is developing this apocalyptic narrative about the country that we seem to roll out every 4 years. If we don't elect McCain, if we don't elect Romney, then everything ends. The younger people I talk to don't like this. They feel like they get up the next day and they don't necessarily see the impact, although it is impacting them directly. And so they start tuning our party out. And what we need to realize, look, this is not only electorally insufficient, it is unbecoming of conservatism. If you look at our founding fathers and the documents they laid forth, they weren't they had a very optimistic view about a very limited role of government. And I think that's where we can step forward and say we're not libertarians. I do believe in a role in a federal government and in that role and in a role they can have. And if we say that, and if we articulate that message, if we go to groups that don't necessarily feel like, you know, this previous caller mentioned union members. Well, Chris Christie did pretty good with union members.
Yeah.
Scott Walker, yeah, doing very well with union members now. And he had to have frank discussions because they weren't trying to take something away as much as they were trying to make sure something would last. And I think that's where we go. And there's so many good governors we've mentioned, but there's a lot of good examples, but we have to do it. You're right. If we don't take that step forward, like I said, we're just not going to have enough of us to vote to win elections anymore. We have to take a step forward and say our party is about ideas, it's about a vision for the country, and we're going to draw differences between ourselves and the competition. But boy, we've got a great message.
Your generation, probably more than any generation, wonders what the future is going to be looking like because they look at the amount of money that's going out to entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. Then Buddy Matthews, Dr. Merrill Matthews, who sits in that chair every once in a while, wrote a piece in Forbes, and Rush Limbaugh quoted it today, so I'm going to quote it too, that now we apparently have crossed the tipping point. We now have more people receiving government benefits than are paying for the government benefits. Because of Obamacare, we're now up to, you add another 7 million who've signed up for benefits under Obamacare, another 3 million, probably closer to 4 million for Medicaid, and now you get up to 161 million, or 52% of households that are receiving government benefits. Now, I'll be the first to admit a lot of those people deserve those benefits. They have paid into Social Security and Medicare and deserve those. They have worked in the military and the government, deserve those benefits. But you do have a problem, and it's going to be a problem your generation is going to have to face more than anything else. If you want to have limited government and you want to cut back spending, it's going to be hard to make that case because a majority of households are dependent upon more government spending.
And I think it's not enough just to say, and see, you followed up on it well, but I don't hear many conservatives do that. We kind of say, you know, President Obama, I think, has authored 4 budgets with trillion-plus deficits, and this is the first time a president's ever done it. He's already authored 4. we have to be able to say, listen, here's what happens when we spend too much money. When we spend too much money, government has to take a bigger step, a bigger role in your life, and it's going to hurt small businesses like mine. It's going to hurt what sort of health care I can offer. It's going to hurt whatever else I'm doing in any role as in any business, and it's going to ultimately restrict young people's ability to make their own decision and to say, here's what's good for me or my family if they choose to have a family.
Well, again, I know that one of the surveys done a while back said that your generation believes that their chances of receiving Social Security when they retire are probably about equal to their chances of seeing a UFO. And so that is not good news. And that also is, again, maybe one of the reasons why we have so much cynicism among the younger generation saying, you know, this is the world you've left us, and it's not in very good shape. That's why I think, young people, you need to get involved. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls as we continue our conversation with Court Alley right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Court Alley in studio with us for just a few more minutes. Let's take another phone call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go out to California. Chris, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I really like this topic. I had a couple of comments I wanted to get your opinion on, and one is that, you know, it's really hard right now with this young generation with, you know, how liberal the colleges are, and it just seems like it's becoming more and more liberal, and the whole rock the vote, and, you know, when the media is pushing young people to vote, it's not because they want them to vote conservative, it's the opposite. And my other point was that I think the church is not really, teaching what, people should be voting for or discussing the topics because they think they're too political.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I look at, abortion and gay marriage. That's not political. That's more spiritual, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Good point. Let's take them in order. First of all, you went to the University of Texas, majored in government, and I do know of one or two individuals there that I would think might call themselves conservatives, but most of your professors were about as liberal as some of the ones that I knew back in Berkeley, California, right?
It was fortunate. They're overwhelmingly, I'd say they're probably 70, 80% pretty liberal. I had a very good conservative professor. I had another professor that was pretty open about being a libertarian. So it wasn't entirely overwhelming.
At least not a filibuster.
Exactly.
Not a monologue.
But I think that we have to go directly to the young people and people, millennials, whatever age they are, and really make sure we're making a solid case to them. Irrespective of what college they're in or where they are. I wish I knew a better way to fix to have more conservative professors in college. I was a minor in business. A lot of those professors were pretty conservative. So.
Yeah, certainly. But, again, there's a value in getting involved with, I know they have everything from young Republicans. They have all sorts of conservative groups that have been on campus. There have been alternative newspapers and on and on and on. But part of that is making sure that your young people, before they go off to college, kind of know what they believe, not only politically, but spiritually, most importantly. There can be a real kind of battle for the minds and ideas. But he raised another issue, and that is churches oftentimes don't speak to these issues. Now, if you go to our website today, you will see the second web link is entitled Churches and Elections. And this was put together by our good friend Kelly Shackelford, who will be in studio with us Friday, as most Fridays when he can be in town is with us. And they put together what churches may not do and what churches may do. Well, what churches can't do is like two things. Number one, you can't, as a church, endorse a candidate. I don't know of any church that's done it. I've seen a couple pastors come pretty close from the pulpit, but that's the case. You cannot contribute money to a candidate's campaign. I don't know of any church that does that. But then when you look at all the things churches can do, it's a long list. They can register their members as voters. They can pass out voter guides. They can invite candidates to a race to speak to issues. They can speak directly to, as Chris was talking about a minute ago, these moral issues. So the problem is not the legal issue. The problem is, and I'd love to get your comments, Court, a lot of pastors say, well, it might be really controversial, but I think if we don't teach people that they have a stewardship responsibility, they should use their gifts and callings, and I think they should use their spiritual gift. We live in a country where we have the gift of the vote, and yet I think to use the parable of the talents, a lot of Christians just bury their talent, and they don't use that. And you know as well as I do that if you got more people in some of the churches that liked you to go out and vote, you might be running for office right now, right?
Well, probably the case, yes. I think one of the things that one of the first steps every church should be taking is reminding, just as God gives us sovereignty over whatever's in our life, we have stewardship over this country as Americans, and voting isn't something that there should be a debate on whether or not I should. There might be some circumstances where two candidates are running against each other, and you don't feel like either one of them necessarily reflects your beliefs. But
sure,
voting I would say, is something we should all be doing. And I read some article. Boy, it was really sad that if X amount of evangelical Christians that voted under President Bush had voted for President or Senator McCain, then McCain would have won.
Well,
we
true.
Just lost evangelical Christians.
We did.
And
then from McCain to Romney, you lost more.
Well, and
that may have been the Mormon issue, but I don't think so. I just think there is a sense of fatigue, and if people understood their stewardship responsibility, they would elect better people to office, I think.
That's right. And I think that is a first place that I understand pastors and preachers having a hesitancy to jump into debates on some issues. I think some issues grace-filled churches have nothing less than an obligation to speak to the issues. Certainly life would be one of them. and not in a political sense, but say we're not necessarily supporting one party or the other. What we're trying to do is say this issue of life is important.
Sure.
And here's
life
why
and marriage, same-sex marriage, all those kinds of things. When I talked about churches, I'll give this one to you as an illustration. A while back, I used to do a program on the Moody Broadcasting Network, and one of the people that was with me on a pretty regular basis was Penny Pullen. She was in the Illinois legislature, and I tell the story because she's told it many times before. When she ran for re-election, she had the closest vote in American history. It was a tie vote. Now, you can imagine what would happen in a tie vote. Well, they'd never had that before. It was a complete tie vote. So they went into the judge's office, they flipped a coin, and she lost. Then, here's the rest of the story. She went to church that Sunday, and she counted more than 30 people all coming up and saying, "Oh, Penny, if I'd known the election was that important, I was out of town, I could have gotten an absentee ballot. Oh, Penny, if I'd known that was important, I got off work late and I didn't bother to go and vote." If just one of those people in her church had voted for her, she'd still be serving probably today in Springfield, Illinois. Yep. And so when people say, what difference is one vote? Just go ask my friend Penny Pullen. She lost by a coin toss because people in her church did not vote for her.
And I think if you look at state representatives, state rep races, which I looked at, one of the things that drew me to start Brighter Dallas was looking at these state rep races. I remember there was one that was decided by, I believe, 18 votes, another a couple hundred votes. We can get people together at the Brighter Dallas meetings and have 100+ people show up, and that's enough people to sway whether it be a city council race or a state rep race, some of these smaller races. But you're right, we have to vote. It's not hard. If you're young, it's a simple thing to do. Register to vote. There's multiple websites. You just Google "how do I vote?" They'll show you. You'll get the phone book.
Well, I got to put you on the spot just before we go. What do you think the future is for Court Alley? You ran for office once, and I know that Mary Claire's probably listening. Okay, what's he going to say this time? But I hope that you will run for office again, and I hope that you are in elective office because we need people like you.
Well, it was great. It's an inspiration to get to know people like Matt Krause and people that are not, and Scott Turner. And the thing with Matt and Scott that I got to know them, and they've been a state rep, but that's not what they are. They're a state rep. That might be their vocation. But what they do is they're husbands, their fathers, and they're God-honoring people, and they set a great example. And I just brought up two, but boy, there are a ton to bring up. Senator Paxton, future Attorney General Paxton would be another. Right now, I'm pretty focused on just being the best wife or best husband and father I can be, and just a tax-paying Texan. Now.
You're doing a great job. Caruth Marketing, and certainly, of course, married and a 2-year-old son, and that's enough to keep anybody busy. But I got a feeling we'll be hearing from you again. So, Court, thanks for taking the time in the busy life that you have to give us an hour today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby.
Just before we go, let me just mention that tomorrow we're going to get into this immigration debate. A couple of things. First of all, my commentary today is on immigration. We also have a take action item on that. And tomorrow, Representative Louis Gohmert will be with us for the first hour as we talk about the immigration debate. He has been to the border, and we're going to have a chance to hear from him. And if that's not enough, then in the second hour today, we're going to talk about a very important issue, and that is the prayer issue that has been taking place. Anne Graham Lotz will be with us, and we'll also talk about her new book on heaven. So Louis Gohmert, all the political issues the first hour, it's going to discourage you. Then Anne Graham Lotz in the second hour, hopefully to encourage you that God is still in control. But you can't do much better than those two guests over the next 2 hours the next time we convene Point of View. So I hope you'll join us then. Tell your friends to listen in. And we want to, again, thank those who have been involved behind the scenes today, Andrew and Catherine and Chris. And if you would like more information about the book that we talked about in the first hour, watch some of the videos. It's all available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll take a break, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. We'll see you then.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.